Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our YouTube channel. We're back again with Dr. Wagner, continuing our conversation on the book, The Whispering God. Once again, Dr. Wagner has taught philosophy of religion to both undergraduate and graduate students. The theme of philosophy is decidedly non-sectarian and deals with issues of theism, deism, and atheism. This book deals with prayer, the seasons of spiritual development, meditative prayer, and both the great promise and the great path, as in the context of Christian religiosity. This is part two of the video. Please do check out part one. Um, Dr. Wagner, welcome. In our last episode, we ended our conversation with what is prayer? You defined what prayer meant for you. Um, is prayer necessary to be a good person?
I think that one thing that is necessary for being a person is to be able to get beyond yourself. I think it becomes all but impossible to be a good person if your focus does not extend just beyond your wants and your ways of seeing the world. And one of the things that prayer, of course, does do is help you get outside of yourself, unless you think of prayer as nothing but asking God to give you something, because then you're treating God as though he's no more than an ATM machine, like we said before. Give a prayer and get a goodie. So if you're self-focused, I don't think you would be considered a good person. You wouldn't assist others who are in need. You wouldn't be the person who would run out to the street and pull a young child out of the way of an oncoming car. You wouldn't have any reason to be faithful to spouses or friends or to creditors or debtors. Yeah, I don't think if you're focused on self, you can be a good person. Now, what's the relationship between that and prayer? Well, prayer forces you to extend outside yourself. I don't think there's much to pray when you're just asking God to give you more, because you don't even need God in the view when that's all you're doing is asking for stuff for yourself. But prayer, I think, begins with setting yourself aside and looking into the horizons, the spiritual horizons, where there seems to be a godly figure that will listen to you and that you want to present your whole heart and being to, that you want to step outside yourself. And this is somebody you can step outside to. And so, in that light, that type of prayer would free you from the badness of selfishness and the goodness of being unselfish.
So, putting in simpler terms, what does it mean to be a good person?
I think to be a good person means that you consider all other people of free will and all those who are dependent upon you who may not, who may be disabled in exercising their free will and so on. You attend to them and they can count on you. You're a trustworthy person.
So, what does it mean to be a bad person?
I think a bad person means to turn your back on others, to only take care of yourself, take advantage of others as soon as you have a chance if you think it's going to help yourself more. In mathematical game theory, which is quite the rage for, well, heck, since World War II, that was invented by mathematician Johnny von Neumann and the economist Oscar Morgenstern, but we had already been thinking along those lines before. And in game theory, one ways of breaking up game theory is to talk about a zero-sum game in which when you win, I lose. When I win, you lose. That's zero-sum game. There's no way of working together. One person's win has to be at the cost of another person's loss. And then there's a non-zero sum game, and a non-zero sum game means that no one is injured, but people gain differentially. So they don't have to be equal in what they gain, but and so they gain differentially, but no one is um, used, manipulated, treated badly for others to succeed or to be rewarded. So good people don't want to injure other people. That's the bottom line.
So, taking it up a notch, does sin exist?
Does what exist?
Sin, S-I-N, sin.
Oh, does sin exist? Well, yeah. I think sin exists whenever you turn your back on others just to serve yourself in one case. In another case, which is really interesting, and I can't say I've ever really understood it. Uh, St. Augustine from back in the 5th century, in writing his own confessions, he wrote that the greatest sin he ever committed. Now, this is a guy who impregnated somebody, and then when he decided that he was to become a priest and then a bishop, he leaves her beside in Africa, northern Africa, and then goes up to the European continent to lead his life, which led us to call him Saint Augustine. It seems to me he had some things he could really have identified as his big sins. But what he identified as his big sin was that he and some friends, when he was young, went into a neighbor's yard and they pulled all the apples off of the apple tree
Mm.
and just destroyed them. They didn't even eat them. They didn't even steal them and take them away. They just destroyed them. And he thought to take something that God has given to us or to others and just destroy it for no particular reason other than to emphasize your control over God's gift to the world. It's got to be the greatest sin of all. And so that was the sin that he has always had the greatest trouble forgiving in himself. I've never quite understood that myself. I understand part of it, I guess, but it still seems to be a bit of a stretch because I'm thinking, well, what do you think you did to the woman you left behind?
Yeah.
Wasn't
Yeah.
wasn't that taking advantage of someone?
Well, the
Um,
child.
yeah, and a child. So um, my first inclination is to say when you take advantage of another person, that's certainly sin. Um, and I'm willing to admit Augustine's story of the apples as sin as well, in the way that he describes it. I don't know that I would call it the greater sin, but I think it would be a sin to just take God's gift the to creation and destroy it for no other reason than to exhibit that you have the power to create what God has given.
So, can can sin be erased or forgotten about under specific conditions?
Yeah, well, that's really a tough question because it has both a theological answer and a psychological answer. Um, my good friend, the psychiatrist, Dr. Milton Althusser, had been a full professor of psychiatry at 2 medical schools here in Texas. He would say that we can, with proper treatment and so on, that we can move beyond um, most sins that he's encountered in his practice. Because if you don't, you're essentially creating another sin by destroying your own life, and that you don't move forward to do something with what God gave you. I have a difficult time appreciating what he's saying, but he's a very competent psychiatrist, very well known. And there certainly is something to be gained from what I explained he just said. On the other hand, it seems to me that when you've really hurt somebody, now I think Shakespeare got it right. In Othello, the protagonist has a spot on his hand of the blood of the person he killed. And, he says, out, damn spot out. And of course, the blood never goes away. And it would seem to me when you've done something really hideous, why should it go away? I mean, we can think of something grand like a Hitler. Uh, how can he get over that? And why should anyone even try to help him get over that? And why would anyone try to nurse him out of his guilt of doing something so horrific? Now, what if somebody did something really awful, like um, Andrea Yates, who thought a spirit had talked to her and drowned two of her own kids, thinking that that was the word of a holy angel telling her to do that. Was she out of her mind? And the first jury said no, she wasn't out of her mind, and the grounds they had for saying that was that after she called the police to come, she cleaned up the bathroom so that the blood in they're throwing up and all that wouldn't be seen. Well, that seems to suggest she knew that what she did was wrong and should be held accountable for having done wrong, sinned, we could say. A second jury on a retrial, they had said that her insanity was so grievous that she couldn't imagine that what she was really doing was a wrong. And so if you can't imagine what you're really doing is a wrong, then what you're doing, not only can you get off the hook with the law as a wrong, but wouldn't you be off the hook with regards to sinfulness? If you don't know you're sinning, if you don't know you're turning your back on the Creator, then how could the Creator or anybody hold your feet to the fire for what you've done? It seems to me sin has to be done intentionally. Can we ever sin unintentionally by being negligent? Yeah, I think we can. But I think even if grievous things happen from negligence, they don't become grievous sin. I left the heater on during the freeze that we had in Houston recently, and oh, I didn't know that you shouldn't do that. Walk out of the house and come back and the house is burned down, and no one died, but all the stuff that we had in here is gone. My children's uh, little shoes, my wife's family's goods, that they're all gone. And that was all due to my negligence, if that were to happen. Have I sinned? I Yeah, I might have sinned. It would have been a sin of negligence. But even though great grief came from it, I don't think it's a sin of great sinfulness. It's a minor sin. Uh, Catholics make a difference between what they used to call mortal sins and venial sins. And mortal sins, without direct confrontation with the Lord and His forgiveness, damned your soul to hell. Minor sins just made your life tainted, and you certainly should be sorry for it. But it doesn't mean that you have cast aside all reverence for God, for creation, and all that God made. So, yeah, I think there's sin. I think there's a lot theologically to be said about it, and I can't explain all those things. They certainly deserve attention, and I also think they deserve attention in common with what we know about psychiatry and psychology. To what extent were you responsible? To what extent were you intentionally involved in creating harm in the world of God's creation? The more your involvement, the more sinful your actions. The less your involvement, the less sinful.
So what you just described as a minor sin, could that be same as mistake? Because I think mistakes are forgivable, but sins are not.
I think sins are forgivable, particularly minor sins. I think are forgivable. They There is a cost to them, but it certainly isn't the damnation of your soul for all of eternity, that sort of thing. But there's surely some kind of a cost, and there certainly is remorse in the sinner. Um, if I left the heater on and a house burned down, that was negligent. I didn't mean to burn down a house. I didn't mean to destroy all these antiques from days past of both my family and myself. It was an accident. It was, you call it a mistake. I wouldn't say it's quite a mistake because I, um, I was still negligent. I should have kept it in my mind. I'm an adult. I know you don't leave heaters on in a house when you walk out, and I did. I didn't mean to do that. I didn't mean to burn down a house, but I was negligent if that's what I did. So minor sin, grievous results. You don't define sinfulness on the basis of the results. Maybe that's one of the arguments of Augustine too. But you don't base sinfulness on the arguments themselves, but the grievousness of the what's done, but really on the intention of the person committing the sin. Somebody, I think it's a grievous sin for people to make fun of the disabilities of another person, to
Mm,
bring them to tears with their psychological bullying.
mm.
Now they don't leave bruises that you can see in the person, but they've injured that person seriously within and maybe for a long time to come. So I think intention is key to understanding the seriousness of sin.
So I guess, yeah, the emphasis is more on intention than the action
Right. Or more intention than the outcome.
outcome. Either way, there are consequences to be.
Yeah, but I wouldn't worry about the consequences because they can be very misleading. Um, if you and I are in the same room and I've gotten angry with you and I shoot a gun to kill you, but I'm not a very good shot. And so I miss you, but I killed this guy that was coming in the window behind you. And he
Mm.
was, coming in to do great damage to you. And I've killed him. I shouldn't be hailed as a hero, as a savior. I was trying to do bad. I'm just not a good shot. And the consequences were that I killed and saved your life from this bad person entering the window. It doesn't make me good. My intentions were bad. And so I say it's not the consequences, it's the intentions. And same thing with the uh, sometimes having good intentions. I, I think most surgeons that take a knife to somebody have good intentions. But statistically, on average, roughly 1% of people that go under heart surgery will die during the surgery. I doubt the intentions of the surgeons are to kill their patients. But certainly the consequences are horrible. But that I don't think that surgeon has sinned. He was doing the best job he could, and maybe he made a little mistake here, or didn't plan on things just right. I don't know, but the consequences are not what determines whether or not he sinned or not. He was trying to save a life. He was trying to do good. The consequences were very bad, however.
So that's, I guess, in the Bhagavad Gita, that's what Shri Krishna says. Uh, do your duty, focus on your deeds, and your intentions. Don't worry about the outcome, the rewards or the no, non-rewards. Very interesting. So, Dr. Wagner, does God talk to Like you or Mrs. Wagner? Or does
Um,
does God talk to you, like talk to a person? And then if yes, then what language would he use?
those are good questions. First of all, to lead into one of the things that I again find amusing by people who I really consider to be pseudo-religious, they'll tell you that God's talking to them all day long. God's always telling him this, God's always telling him that. And so many of these people seem to be the most self-centered, wrapped up in their own world people I've ever seen. And yet they never stop talking about how God is telling them this and telling them that. And these same people will be hateful toward other religions. For example, they'll be hateful toward Catholics because they'll say, the Catholics believe that the Pope speaks to them. And I can't help but half laugh at that because, hey, you've been telling us all day long about how God is talking to you all. If I listen to you, it makes it sound like God just never shuts up. And you want to object to the Catholic Pope saying that he had a message from God. Do you know how many times the Catholic Church has said that God has spoken to a Pope? And, of course, they won't know that. Um, but it's only been three times in history. And when the Pope reports it, it's under the doctrine of ex cathedra, which means the Pope is speaking from the chair to basically just repeat the words of God. Now, there's been hundreds of popes. The Catholic Church has been around for 2,000 plus years, and only three times in 2,000 years does the Catholic Church say that God ever spoke to even a pope, much less others. And yes, and I don't remember each of the three times, but I do remember one. It was in the early part of the last century, around, I don't know, 1905, 1910, when a pope had a visitation by God or in some manner of that sort. And God told him that Mary, the mother of Jesus, that her body had been brought to heaven. That's it. Not a whole lot going on there. And then the Pope turns around and says that he had this experience, and God told him that Mary's body had gone to heaven. All the other things that people may hear that the church gives as guidance with regards to different behaviors, um, those are all given as a sense of duty of clergy that clergy in almost any religion would have to try to help those that follow them to recognize where the guide rails are so they live a more godly rather than a less godly life. But the Catholic Church just doesn't claim that God is talking to any of them on a regular basis. Um, three times, as the Pope said, ex cathedra, God spoke to me. So for most of us, I I don't think God speaks to us in any way that we would recognize as the utilization of a human language to describe something. Uh, Many years ago, Catholics, and other Christians, Protestants, and uh, I think Islam and Jews, both Sephardic and the I'm forgetting the other name. Sephardic are from North Africa, and then the others went up to Turkey and so on. Anyway, I think all believe that God spoke to Moses, and man, that was a long time ago. And I think God spoke to Adam and Eve, so the story goes. God spoke to Joshua, and he spoke to Isaiah, and he spoke to Noah. And did he speak to anybody else? I don't know, but we're talking about a few snippets over thousands of years. Um, so God's not a chatterbox. But if we listen to God, I do think He communicates with us in ways that we come to understand. But it's not by using any language. And if I've got it right, Hinduism and Buddhism and so on also have this sense that God, communicates with a kind of a feel.
Mhm.
And I think that's what happens to people, Christians, Jews, Muslims, if they are lucky enough to have experienced a successful prayer. It wasn't an essay that was read to them. It's not a speech, but they somehow did get enlightenment. And it works its way through the human brain um, in a way that gives direction to a person's life, uh, productive direction. That would be my thought.
Profound, profound. Do you, this is just randomly coming in my head. Do you think the frequency of that communication between God and man lessened because of where we are in time? Because we're getting closer to the end?
Oh, I can't even possibly imagine. I just can't possibly imagine.
I mean, the purity has faded away compared to before. Anyways,
I can't imagine. It's just that's way too big of a question for my mind.
okay. What about this? Do you take Bible history literally?
Ah, I I tend to believe that there are moments in biblical history that are indicative of our healthful theological development. I can't prove that those moments are right, and I think the Bible's a miracle, both the Old Testament and the New Testament. And what I mean by a miracle is this thing was written so people in 600 BCE could read it and get meaning from it. And it
Mhm.
doesn't have to be the story that gives you the meaning. It's somehow um, what the story affects inside the human mind. And whether you're 600 years ago BCE or you're yesterday in today's world, I think you can find in the Bible something that you need to direct your life um, in the both the immediate future and the long range future. I'll give you a couple of examples. Um, the After the flood, I think I already mentioned this yesterday. In the flood, God says to Noah, I mean, my creation is good. Now you'll be servants of the world and you need to take care of it. Um, and I think something like that, it doesn't even make any difference if the world was flooded to me. So it doesn't make any difference whether it's literal or not. But it is a story that's incredibly meaningful. And but I could also say, and I don't mean to put religions on the same religion, I think, or on the same grounds, because I think that's kind of disrespectful too. If you find your platform to talk to God, stick with that platform, and God will talk back to you. And Siddhartha at the riverside, um, listen to the river, and I can't. I think that's incredibly profound. I think that that's what uh, what a whirling dervish is. In Turkey, they had whirling dervishes. They would dance and they would spin and spin and spin. And they would have this mystical experience with God.
Uh,
Um, who am I to doubt that they're actually having some experience, with God as a result of doing that? Or the rabbis davening,
mhm.
or Christians saying a rosary or whatever. Um, in each of those cases, something magnificent may happen between the person and uh, the Creator. And in the Bible, there are so many incredible stories that well, Jesus often talked in parables. The parable of the Good Samaritan. Um, he sees the guy in the ditch, been beaten up and all that. And Samaritans were tended to be enemies of the Jewish tribes. Good Samaritan picks him up and takes him to the next town, puts him in a hotel, and tells the innkeeper, "Take care of him, and when I come back through, I'll pay for all of his expenses." That's a good guy, and that's a good story. That's a good story. Just like the Christian who hears something of the story of Siddhartha that says, "Sit by the river and listen." So the Christian can say, "Well, I don't have any interesting rivers around," or "I'm in the middle of the Hudson River in New York here." That won't do. Go to an empty church
Mhm.
and listen. Listen. Tell God what you need to talk about, but mostly listen. Don't expect to hear words. Just expect to feel understanding after a half an hour or more when you get up to leave. Listen.
And you're right. That silent is pretty loud
Hmm.
when you get to that. It is loud, so you can't miss it.
Yeah.
Um,
And so I
uh,
think to go back to your original question, I think the Bible should be taken literally. No, I think it should be taken miraculously. That is to
mhm.
say, there's lots of things in there that if you try to meditate on it, you may find yourself comforted and understanding things far better than you did. The other day we talked about the great promise being God said He never abandoned us, and yet there is Jesus on the cross saying, my Lord, why hast Thou abandoned me?" And so at first glance, particularly a hard-nosed atheistic critic might look at that and say, "There you go, I caught you guys." Even Jesus felt abandoned by the Lord, and you guys even said He was the Son of God. So at first glance, it may say that it seemed like the atheists got something on you. But think about it. Jesus was talking to somebody, and He certainly wasn't talking to the people down below.
Mm.
So who's He talking to? The only one left is His Father, God. My God, why hast Thou forsaken me?" And we don't know what God said back to him, but we have every reason to believe that there was a conversation, and that conversation must have been good enough that Jesus, who to the extent that he was godlike, could have taken him off the cross anytime he willed, but he continued with the suffering. So whatever was communicated between the two, that very conversation, that very question that Jesus asked, seems like it must have been to his Father, and he wasn't abandoned as we rush to suppose. And I think that might even be the message of that, because at times, surely all of us have had you get a bad result from an oncologist. An oncologist always means these people are dealing with cancer, and we're all scared to death of cancer. Give us a wart or a kidney stone or something, but don't tell us we have cancer. And so when we get the warning about cancer, that's so devastating. And right in that moment where we can feel so alone, where do we turn? Well, I don't think we turn helplessly to a non existent God. I think we turn to a God. And what we are saying is, my God, why hast thou abandoned me? And just like Jesus didn't leave the scene of the action as he could have, whatever was said back to him was enough to carry him through the whole thing. And so I think the devout person gets that bad diagnosis regarding a cancer, and they go, my God, why hast thou abandoned me?" If they listen, they learn they haven't been abandoned. They just needed to listen more deeply. And that doesn't mean God's going to cure them of his cancer any more than God was going to take Christ off the cross. The promise not to abandon is, "I'm going to walk with you through this whole thing."
I'm gonna let that sink in. um, wow. So uh, I have a question. It's processing. I'll come back to it. But
Okay.
in the book, in the book you made a point that God was talking to Noah after the flood. Why did you think to include that point?
Because I think it's so critical. Um, and I came to that thinking as a result of spending some time in silence and asking um, for understanding about that. Um, why the flood? Why does God even bother to talk to Noah afterwards? And what's it all about, Alfie? And I think it's really important that God says to us, I created something good, but I'm giving you stewardship over it. It's up to you to take care of it or not. So he gives us responsibility. In giving us responsibility, and I don't even think he's given us responsibility there. He already gave it to us. He's reminding us that we've had responsibility that we neglected before the flood. He's responding to us, reminding us that we have free will, because we couldn't have responsibility if we didn't have free will. So that moment is a package of theology. It says, I've given you free will and you misused it at times. I've given you responsibilities for which that free will was to lead you through. I've given you one of my greatest gifts was chance. I didn't make a world that was like a bunch of dominoes that you just push over and everybody knows where it's going to go. That would not be a very creative world. I gave you a world with chance in it. Chance, complete chance. That means I didn't even know where things were going to go. I built chance into the world. And so probabilities, they exist throughout all of creation. And that's part of what makes creation good. Creation's interesting. It's interesting because chance is built into it. And so as you walk through this world of more or less probable events, you're responsible for utilizing your free will to make the best of this world in flux. That also makes the world, think about it, interesting, not just to us, because we never know what's around the corner. It's got to make the world interesting to God. For those who think that God made everything the way somebody puts together a Tinker Toy set, that it would seem to me that God had to be simple-minded and very bored. And so he's got to make a God, he's got to make a world that he found interesting. And that in part meant he had to create chance. Chance was one of his greatest creations.
So, okay, I'm back in my thing. When you mentioned how the 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 history of Bible to be taken literally or miraculously, I took when I was at HBU, I took Bible study Old Testament, so I have
Mhm.
little knowledge of that. Um, also have little knowledge of the Holy Quran. And of course, I have little bit knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavad Gita. What I have learned from all these different books, and again, I am nobody. I just what my mind interprets from reading this. Um, no matter how many different perspectives are there regarding the higher power or the source, eh, almost every religion has similar experiences, similar messages, same guide to go back home. But it's amazing to me that the how long ago was this written, right? Some of this stuff is written in languages we don't even know. But it is so relevant to now. And as you said, it will be relevant to the future generations as well. But like when we had Bible study at the college, some of our prompts were to take verses from the Old Testament, whether it was the book of I think, oh my God, Enoch.
Well, Tanakh is what we call the Jewish Bible and the commentaries on the uh,
So
Old Testament.
that
Yeah.
was yeah, that was part of it, right? So the professor would give us a prompt and then would say, make that relevant to today. And then as a class, we discussed that. But it was really interesting, and a lot of the stuff that came from the Bible is in the Bhagavad Gita, it's in the Holy Quran, but it's how it's being interpreted and maybe how it's being used um, to separate people in the name of religion, right?
Well,
And
I think it gets used to separate people in religion, just as a inevitable consequence of our ineptness. We humans want to tidy up everything. We want we want it to be a world of an erector set built where you can see where everything is. We when you plan a dinner party is successful when everything goes just the way the dinner planner wanted it. And if anything goes wrong, it's like, oh, we just want to know what's going to happen and that we can make it happen in that way. And once again, going to the Bible, God already addressed that because there was a character called Job. Job wanted to know, look, I did this, this, and this, and I haven't really been a bad guy, but how I got all these warts and things all over me, and my kids are there's horrible things happening to me. Why is it? My friends all think I must have done bad things, and I haven't. Why is all this happening to me? Job wants an erector set explanation. I want to know exactly how this goes together. So he has faith in the Lord because he thinks that, the Lord's got this great plan that just everything fits together. And the Lord has this great response to him. Job was another one that God spoke to. He has this great response to him. He says, where were you when I created the heavens? Where were you when I created the oceans? Where were you when I created the stars? Where were you? And the point that he's making is you're asking questions that you can't possibly understand.
hmm,
And and so we just don't like the idea. Well, we think we don't like the idea. We just don't like the idea that we can't wrap it all up and have everything tidily spread out on a table like a good dinner party about to begin. And we can't. And if you say, well, why can't we? I just have to refer you back to Genesis and God saying, or to Job, and to God saying, where were you when I was doing all these things? And since none of us were there, we can't give an answer to that. But what we can say is these things surround us. So now, if you want to talk to God about anything sensible, you might take some time and listen to what God might have to say to you about how you engage this particular challenge at this particular moment. Because you're not going to learn about an erector set. God may not have used an erector set imagination to build his creation. I don't think he did. I think I think God wanted to make a world that was interesting, not only to us, but to him. And to be interesting, he had to invent chance, which I think was, perhaps his greatest invention. And boy, look at all the mathematicians who have tried to untangle the mathematics that would allow us to master chance. And all it does is help us see a little bit further than what we saw previously, but it doesn't lay out how all the dominoes are spread to go over exactly in order and to create an um, unavoidable conclusion of all.
Well, I am just happy that God has sense of humor. Okay, my last question, Dr. Wagner.
All right.
You tell a story about some soldiers dying in a battle during Vietnam War, while others a hairbreadth away like live. What was the point of including that?
Well, I talked to two fellows whose stories both made me think of that because both fellows were troubled about why did I live and the other guy died. So I'll tell you each story in turn. The first one was came from the guy who's actually the publisher of the book, and he had been a journalist in Vietnam at the time. Uh, well, he had been a journalist for the army, not for a private press concern, but he was a journalist for the army. And would be sent to different battle zones to record what was going on. And he was in one battle zone, um, and it was in an area where we weren't supposed to be. But he's there, and some of the guys that he met were digging out foxholes for what they anticipated was going to be an attack by the Viet Cong. And so they dug out their foxholes, thinking the attack was imminent. And he's there with them. And the attack came. Mortar shells were coming in. Sometimes a mortar shell might land right smack dab in somebody's foxhole. Well, that's going to leave the person, I mean, not even just wounded. I mean, there's nothing that can be even fixed. And somebody in one of the trucks that they were moving out of the way said, "You want to come with me?" And he was in a foxhole with another guy. And he said, "Okay." And he jumped in the truck, and they started driving away. And a shell landed in that foxhole, killing the other guy that was still there. Had he not jumped out, had the guy I'm talking about not jumped out and gotten in a truck, he would have been destroyed at that split moment too. And he often wonders about that. Did God save him as opposed to somebody else? And I think that's kind of a pointless question to ask. Um, with the world I made a good world, but now you're now the caretakers of it. And chance is built into this world. I'll never abandon you. Whether you stayed in that foxhole and you died, I would have been at your side. You would have still died, but I would have been at your side. You got in that truck, and I was with you. Which was the right answer? Why would you think there was a right answer to choose from? You're in the middle of combat. Everything is a mess going on around you. Ideally, in the world I gave you, there wouldn't be combat. What is the chance of there being combat? Well, I also gave you chance. And in this case, chance turned into a battle zone in this part of the world. In this case, chance turned into you getting into a truck instead of staying into a foxhole. Why would you want some more explanation than that? You certainly don't deserve more explanation than that, do you? But we want it all packed together. The conversation that he now takes with God is to thank God. And I don't know why I got out. I don't know if there was any plan, but I'm sure happy I got out. And I'm sure happy I got to do all the things I've done for the rest of my life. Is the way he thinks of it now, and that's as he should. And I had another friend, a roommate, um, again, a Vietnam veteran, and he had even killed people. Well, and he wouldn't talk about battle at all. He'd have to get drunk, I mean, really drunk, and he'd start crying, and he would talk about battle. And I stupidly, because I'd never been to any kind of combat, I stupidly asked him, because he told me about an attack, his platoon being attacked, and they were 2 miles outside of American controlled territory. And he was in a foxhole. And they were in really deep trouble. Long story short, he said something. I said, "You mean guys had even gotten into your foxhole with you?" And he got annoyed. And he said, "Yes, of course." And I said, did you kill somebody like in hand-to-hand combat? And he got mad at me. And he said, that's a stupid question to ask somebody. Okay, I wasn't going to go any further with that. Out of about 40 men, when that battle was over with, there were only 4 men left, 2 who were ambulatory and 2 who were not. The 2 who were ambulatory, they had to choose one of them to go 2 miles back to American forces to get a helicopter to come on out and pick the guy who was ambulatory, who stayed with the 2 wounded, and bring them back. And my roommate was the one who went back through 2 miles of uncontrolled territory after that battle, got an airplane, a helicopter to come on out and pick up the other 3. Upon returning to the base, he went to lay down as they treated the other guys. He went to lay down on a cot for, he thought, 15 minutes. He woke up 2 days later. That was such an incredible experience to his entire being that his sense was that only 15 minutes had passed as he's sleeping on that cot, and it had actually been, 2 days. So that gives you an idea of how powerful the experience can be. And no, we can't understand it. And the reason he got mad at me for asking, did he kill anybody, was how do you explain that you killed somebody and how it felt? Did it haunt you afterwards? Would dying have haunted you afterwards? Living afterward? It's just too much. It's just too much. Now, a psychiatrist can come in and give us some razzle dazzle about the brain being clogged up from a lot of messaging going backwards and forwards and so on. And there might be something to that. But there's also something to the idea about, God, why me? And why is it I was allowed to kill others? Was it because they wanted to kill me? Well, I didn't even want to be there. Maybe they didn't want to be there either. That was, their orders to go and attack. Don't know. And so it takes a lot of quiet understanding. Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, the night before he was to be, well, the night he was taken for the crucifixion, and the apostles had gone to sleep a few feet from where he was praying. And, as the Bible story goes, he was bleeding sweat from the stress and the anxiety of what might be ahead. And he didn't want it to happen. And for whatever reason, theologically, that God may have said, here's how this is going to work out. Surely Jesus has got to, because if he was all human as well, he's got to thinking, there's got to be a better way. Why does it have to be this way? Why can't it be a better way where I don't have to go through this? And sometimes we just can't know what to say. And we have to accept that. Jesus accepted it because he went forward with the whole thing. He kept asking, both in Gethsemane, he asked on the cross, why do I have to go through this? The guy in a foxhole. I've never killed somebody before, but I killed people that day. And it's stupid of you to ask me what that's like. I don't even know if he would have talked to anybody else who had been in a similar experience who had actually done that sort of thing. I had an uncle who went through World War II in the Pacific and went from island to island. And he had seen a lot of combat. Even drunk, he wouldn't talk about it. And he drank a lot. He would talk about like being on a ship and shooting a machine gun into the water when they'd see a school of fish nearby, and then throwing in a net and bringing a bunch of fresh fish that they could eat. And they thought that was kind of funny and creative to do. He'd tell stories like that, not stories of combat. And he, at one point, had been on an island where his job with 2 other guys was to guard a guy with a flamethrower. You know what the flamethrower does? the Japanese would be held up in a cave,
Yes.
and so you couldn't go in after them. And the Japanese were so, I don't know if you would call it brave or reckless or whatever, but they might have wound up out of ammunition, but they'd stay in the cave. And if you came in after them, they had their bayonets. They had their empty guns that they could use as clubs. They had their bayonets to fight you. They would fight you to the very, very end. We'd fire up that flamethrower. You never had to worry about going into that cave. And if there had been Japanese soldiers on guard outside near the cave, um, my uncle and the other guy walking along with the flamethrower guy, they had to take care of them, and they didn't know if there was a couple of guards out there waiting to. But he would never talk. He would talk about funny stories. He'd never talk about the guts of combat. And interestingly enough, he was a church-going fellow as he grew old. Um, you need that. Who else do you turn to when there's who else could understand stories like that but God?
But you think that people that experience that in their life, right? Like being on the battlefield or going like witnessing all that stuff or being in the combat zone, you think after experiencing that their faith or their belief in God or something being up there higher than us strengthens? Or after seeing all this, they actually start questioning that does he exist?
I would guess both reactions happen, and do both reactions hold over a length of time afterwards? I don't know. I know in my own case, never having to deal with combat, but I know in my own case having this moment of overwhelming fear, I guess, when each of my kids was born. Because after the woman gives birth to a child, they always give the baby to the dad, and she's in there getting some attention because she's gone through so much, and then they leave this little baby with dad. And thinking back to just even my youngest, the last one that I had this experience with, and I've got her in my hands, and I've got her all swallowed up. And how can I take care of this? I mean, what have I got to give to this? Why me? Huh? Why me? And do you know who I am? Uh, do you see anything there? And it's just overwhelming. What's my plan? I don't have a plan. Well, you've already had 3 kids. Yeah, but I didn't have a plan for any one of them. You want to do good, and you kind of think about that, but I don't have a plan. Um, and where does the plan come from, step by step? If it works, I think it's when you take the moments of silence that God gives you and you listen to Him. If you keep pressing Him, or you keep saying, "Look, I said a prayer now. Give me something to work all this out." You're not buying your way into success. You've got to listen and depend and trust to get it done.
That I it gives me chills every time I think about this, but it is a miracle itself that a chromosome, something that is not visible with naked eye, can create this or
Mhm.
that, right?
Yeah.
Like,
The
just
stem
amazing.
cells, the stem cells that are um, formed at the beginning, they could form any cells.
Mm,
How is it they happen to perform the cell deviations necessary to make one of us?
yeah.
I have a friend who's and I can say this. I don't think at this point his career would bother. He's a Nobel laureate. He was knighted by the Queen of England for his work in medicine. He's got a Nobel Prize in medicine. His name is Sir John Eccles. And he would publish all these scientific papers and send them to me oftentimes. And he'd send me written hand notes telling me what he thought the papers were really revealing. He was particularly taken by some timing experiments that he did, and also another neurophysiologist by the name of Benjamin Libet did out in San Francisco. And Eccles thought that Libet and Libet had no intention in supporting thoughts about God, but Eccles would take Libet's work and his own work and try to figure out there's got to be a God in all this, and there's got to be a God in us. And Descartes thought we had a soul. God placed a soul in us. Well, where did he do it? And, Descartes imagined it was put in a pineal gland because he couldn't figure out anything else the pineal gland did. Well, it's unlikely that God put a soul for us in a pineal gland. But Eccles, by using timing experiments from where a needle may stimulate, say, the finger here, and how long it takes to get up to the brain for you then to make a decision to move your finger away or whatever, or to say ouch. He concluded that the soul was throughout our entire body. And so, for example, if you had lost a leg at a car accident or whatever, it's very common to feel a phantom leg, even though your leg has been amputated. And Eccles would explain that as saying, well, the soul is still intact, and the soul is through your whole body. So even though they took away that leg, the soul is still connected to the rest of itself. And that's why you have that feeling for, a long time after the leg has been amputated. And Eccles was very religious. In fact, I asked him one time, I said, why did you ever become a neurophysiologist? And Sir John said, well, actually, because I've always been interested in the concept of soul and God. He said, but I knew if I became a philosopher to talk about this stuff, nobody would listen to me. But if I became a scientist and studied it, they might. And so that's why he became a neurophysiologist. And of all things, he winds up becoming a Nobel laureate neurophysiologist. So we're not talking about just an ordinary guy here. We're talking about a guy who was a Nobel laureate neurophysiologist who, based upon his own empirical studies, as well as his experience in life, I'm sure, he was sure that we had a soul. There is a famous lay Torah scholar at Hebrew University who's a physicist, published over 100 articles in major physics journals. His name is Gerald Schroeder. And Schroeder is convinced that carbon 14 dating and all that has shown us that humans have been around. The humanoids have been around for a long time, 300 million years or whatever. How is it that we can talk about soul? When did soul get packed into people? And so Schroeder says, well, Genesis gives us a great explanation for that. He thinks Genesis gives us a lot of great explanations when you take the metaphors away and lay scientific explanations on what they suggest. Anyhow, he says, Adam and Eve, there were plenty of people around then. How do you know that? Well, because when Cain kills Abel, God says to the people, leave him alone, I'll take care of things. Well, unless Adam and Eve were having litters of hundreds of kids at a time, who was God talking to? And so Schroeder says, there were plenty of people all over the globe. Homo sapiens sapiens, not just our ancestors, but our species had already begun. And the role of Adam and Eve were to be the first embodied human beings. So the other people around were human beings every bit as much as Adam and Eve were human beings. But Adam and Eve got embodied. They had a soul given to them. And when God tried to explain it to Adam, what's he going to say? I took some DNA from you, and I put it along with some mRNA and some tRNA into this other mess of stem cells that I had packaged up over here. And lo and behold, we get this Eve who has much of you in her. He's never going to understand that. So, imagine God says something like, well, Eve came from your body, and the two of you are embodied. The two of you are souls. And so uh, he goes with that. And I kind of imagine it as happening this way. Okay, Adam, look, I took something, and Adam says, you mean like a rib? Sure, let's go with that. And I use that. So I can imagine something like that happening. And going back to Gerald Schroeder, he says what was really, really interesting was that the Bible has the story of Cain killing Abel and God saying to the people, don't do anything about this. I will take care of it. It's indicating that these people were just like Adam and Eve, and yet there was nothing special about them ever mentioned in the Bible. So that underscores even more so what makes Adam and Eve a plausible story was that they were the first embodied people. And from them, we get their descendants surrounding the world, each being embodied with a soul. And that's it's pretty interesting to meditate on. And in our book, The Whispering God, one of the things we do at the end of every chapter is we try to give people something they haven't already thought of things, something that they can take to a quiet space and think about. One of the things to think about could be this bit about, well, when do you suppose humans got souls? I mean, the biblical story makes us think that we all started about 10,000 years ago. That's ridiculous. We know for a fact human beings, our species, not just our descendants, are those that preceded us, but our species itself has been around for a lot longer than 10,000 years. So what was the Bible trying to say, if the Bible has any kind of reliability to it, with this 10,000 years business? Well, maybe that's the moment of embodiment, soulfulness.
And when you mentioned that piece for Adam and Eve, it is very, very similar to the concept of Shiv and Shakti, which is the divine feminine and the divine masculine together, and then the feminine coming out of the masculine. But it's in all of us. We
Yeah.
we we right now have the masculine qualities and feminine qualities, right? I mean, that's what makes us us.
Well, maybe so. And the thing for people to do is to take what you just talked about, go talk to God about it. Take it to a quiet spot, listen to the river, go into an empty church. Tell God you're thinking about this and have the patience, the calmness to just wait. You're not going to hear anybody talking to you. But after a half an hour or an hour, you might walk out of church. Somehow you got a grasp on this. You don't know where it came from. You don't know how it happened. But somehow you've got a grasp on this you didn't have before.
And I guess when you earlier you said God gave us chance. I guess is it okay to say, or is it correct to say that chance appears to those who are willing to make an effort to look for it,
No,
or it's
because
already there?
chance happens between a quantum particle going from one orbit to another orbit without going anywhere in between. It just happens by chance.
Mm. So then I'm confused because why isn't everyone able to grasp these concepts? You have to
Well,
relate to something.
for well, given a topic that you've picked on here, it makes it really easy. If it's chance, there can be lots of reasons they don't just by chance ever think about this stuff. You probably know a lot of people. I know a lot of people. They don't give any thought to this kind of stuff. I mean, they just don't even give any thought to it. They just look around and go, huh, this is the way the world is. It is what it is.
But
No reason
Dr.
to talk
Wagner,
anymore.
how can you not, right? Like, okay, I have this right in front of me. How can you not wonder how this came to be? Who sat there and designed this?
Well, somebody can go, I don't really care. I'm going to get a brewski and I'm going to watch Family Guy on TV.
How can you not care? It is like such a beautiful, I mean, you know what I
I
mean?
say because I like beer, and I like Family Guy.
I guess Peter's more important, huh?
And he'd say, "Well, it's just by chance that you are mystified by that." And the other guy says, "I'm mystified by brewskis and Family Guy cartoons."
Okay, well, Dr. Wagner, we went a little
Okay.
bit over our time, but man, this is a really good topic. I eagerly look forward to the next one, and I really hope that we have one more company so we can take this conversation far beyond. But as always, thank you so much for the wisdom, for the knowledge, and the time you give. Thank you, sir. Namaste.
Namaste to you, Dr. Dipal. Bye bye.
Thank you, sir. Bye.